So Toronto just announces a new bylaw, or removing all bylaws, allowing all residential properties to go up to 4 units. 4 units. This is absolutely incredible. Provides some tremendous opportunities and maybe some curveballs. And these are all things that we talk about with our good friend, mortgage broker Dion Begg, right after the intro. Welcome, my friends. As promised, here's our good friend and mortgage broker extraordinaire, dialing in all the way from, we'll call it the sunny beach weather. How's that sound? Mr. Dion Begg, how are you?
Fantastic, man. How you doing?
I'm doing excellent, excellent. So it's, we're second weekend of May here in Canada and in Toronto area, and there's always lots going on. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on locally in Toronto. Some big changes coming to your local communities and that ripple effect. But Dion, what's going on? Give us that high level view of what's the mortgage world looked like over the last week or so.
Yeah, so I mean, in the last 2 weeks in Canada, not too much has changed in terms of interest rates. But what happened in the United States was the Fed did come out in the last couple of weeks and announce a small rate increase of 0.25%. And, the old saying from many years ago is when the US sneezes, Canada catches a cold. And what that means is whatever goes on south of the border is felt in some way in Canada. And so there's some speculation as to what this might mean going forward, right?
Excellent, excellent. And there always is that ripple effect of, what our big brother, if you want to call that, or the states does. It does have ramifications on our economy and everything else. And speaking of economy, this is something interesting. So I mentioned to you just off air quickly that on May 10th, at the Toronto Council, there have been talks about what they're doing, and the project or the mandate that they have is something called Housing Now. And of course, we all feel the crunch, affordability, the number of homes, and everything like that. And one of the unique things that Toronto Council just voted in favor for, and I thought Dina and I could just have a banter about it, a conversation about it, is Toronto Council has just removed all zoning bylaws in the fact that they will allow every residential home to go up to 4 units, which is pretty incredible, Dion, right? If there's so many different things and conversations we can talk about, but I'd love to just get your quick thoughts on that, and then you and I could just ask each other questions.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on this point. But firstly, number one, it's very welcomed, right? You and I, for many years, Gary, we've hosted in-person seminars over the years where we put up that map and we show, here's Toronto, there's a lake to our south, there's a whole bunch of protected green space to our north. So we are an island. More land really can't be produced. And so how do we create more housing? Traditionally, it's been to go high rise, right, all the way up to your 30, 50 stories. But there has been this sort of missing middle where there's this opportunity for existing single families to be converted. And I think in particular, this is interesting, I'm from Australia. In Australia, when we build properties, we build with what we call slab on ground, meaning that a slab on grade, meaning we pour the foundation directly onto the surface of the ground. You can't, well, traditionally we haven't been doing that in Canada because of the frost line. So people have to dig down. That's why every Canadian home has a basement. And when I came here, I went, my gosh, every house here has the opportunity to be a duplex at the very least. But some of these areas didn't allow it for zoning and other reasons. But opening the door just to that means one house becomes two. But if what happened yesterday means that one house can become four, then that even opens up more opportunities for maybe affordability too.
Yeah, affordability on the homeowner and themselves, as well as, now they have income helpers or mortgage helpers, multiples, not just one. And my first thought was, this is amazing. Actually, I had a few first thoughts, if you could say that. Is how do we pay for it? So maybe we can have that discussion, as well as, well, what if you're not in Toronto? So I live in York Region. What about York Region and everywhere like that? And the interesting thing there are the concept, because I've thought about messaging my mayor, who I'm good friends with. And my first thought if I was in his shoes, okay, what's the obstacle? What's the hurdle locally? And if you're outside of Toronto, the big thing that Toronto has that most areas outside of the GT or Toronto don't have is that's infrastructure and transportation and everything else. So a lot of these other communities like Newmarket and even up to Barrie, you have to have an excess of exterior parking available,
Mm.
right? And in Toronto, they have such a great infrastructure compared to, uh, right, such a great infrastructure for transportation and everything else. So if you're in that auxiliary area or tertiary area, you're thinking, oh, what about me? Well, think about the infrastructure that's required to implement something like this, right? So
Correct. And
so
I
that was
mean, a lot of the investors that you and I work with, while they might live in the core of the GTA, they often invest in the outer ring. So many of those investors are watching this very closely because, well, and you've probably seen this too. The allowance of what they commonly call garden suites has
mm,
come onto the scene in the last year. But if in addition to garden suites, we can go not just to 2, 3 units, but all the way to 4 units in these outer rings, I think that's going to bring a lot more investor interest in as well. I mean, it's always been a huge investor interest in that outer ring, but affordability and return on cash flow or cash flow or return on investment has always become a little bit tighter in the last couple of years. But the introduction of this means that if instead of having a single family, we can go to a 2 or 3 unit, then things open up, significantly.
yeah, yeah, and one of my favorite clients and yours, in fact, he'll always look at a property and ask himself this question because we've been partners for such a long time. And one of my favorite questions is, well, how can I add value to this? And one of the things that we always look at first, well, can we add it? Can we add income? Can we add a second, third, or fourth suite? Can we get it rezoned? Well, in fact, now all the properties in Toronto are rezoned or will be rezoned, and that provides opportunity and for not for I don't think we're going to see tremendous amount of opportunity come alongside of the big developers because they like go and doing 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 units at a time. I think this provides opportunity for the smaller developer or people perhaps like myself who own a handful of properties and can go add a few units to an investment property. I think that's where the opportunity is going to show up. I don't know about you, Dion. I'd love to get your take on this. Do you think we'll see kind of the mom and pop or the one person that owns one property? Hey, I can add a unit here or 2 units. Do you think we'll see a little bit of that?
Well, I believe we will, and I'll tell you why. I'm already seeing people in their older years who traditionally would have gone and either gone to live with their children or gone and lived in an aged care facility, trying to figure out how they can stay in their home for longer, right? And so, what a lot of our, I guess, younger clients are doing, and I'll tell you, myself included, I bought my family home about 6, 7 years ago. It's a larger home. It's got a big basement, and it's got a. It was set up in such a way that when I looked at the property, I said this could be 3 units,
Mm,
right? And so even though the zoning wasn't there, and this is something for listeners to consider on their own properties or realtors to talk about with their own clients, when you look at an acquisition of a property, as our mutual friend there you mentioned earlier, I know exactly who you're talking about, Wood. When you look at a property, and this is the way I look at it, and I recommend you do. I walked in there and I said, I don't need 3 units in this property today. In fact, to serve me and my family, I just need this whole property for my own personal use. But I'm gonna do some renovations. I'm gonna take down that wall. I'm gonna do some bathroom renovations. And while my workers are here, while the tradespeople are here, this is what I did. I ran electrical, gas, and plumbing to the certain areas in the home that I said to myself, in the future, we might be able to create some space there. It maybe cost me an extra $10,000 at that point in time. And now, knowing what's happened in BC, now in Toronto, I feel like, and my home's in Pickering, just on the outskirts of Toronto there. I feel like it's probably going to be coming in the same way that it's probably going to be coming to Newmarket and Barrie and those other places. And when that happens, then I'm happy that I took those steps to put those things into place. And I think if we look at transaction costs, Gary, have you done the numbers of people who are older selling the larger home and then moving into the smaller home versus renovating and maybe creating that basement apartment, income for retirement, and creating the smaller home because they now only need the upstairs.
Yeah.
Have you run numbers around that? Because I haven't. It's pretty interesting on transaction costs versus renovation costs.
Yeah, I'm doing them in my head, and it would almost, I'm going to guess here, Dion, it's almost at a fair, even playing field, almost, right?
Yeah, yeah. So look, let's just say, and I'll run the numbers with you now. Let's say you got a house worth 1 million, and you're an older person, and you're considering either downsizing to a condo or keeping your place and renovating, closing off the basement, right? So the transaction cost, Gary, would be on a sale. We're looking at 50 grand plus HST, 60 grand in selling commission. Then you got to buy land transfer tax on the other side. Even if it's a smaller place, you'll be in today's world, let's call it 600 grand. You're paying probably another 20 grand or so, depending on the city you buy in. There's 70, 80 grand in transaction costs, right? If instead you took that money to create that separation, maybe that legal basement unit, number one, you get to stay where you are, probably in a superior property that's going to be worth a lot more in 10 years from now, inheritance for your children. Number two, you've created an income which you wouldn't have in the new place, right? And have you know these numbers as much as I do. What are basements renting for where you are?
Oh, where I am, and that's the Stovall area, just north of Markham, basement suite. You're not getting anything less than about 1,800, and that's the bare minimum, bare minimum.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I mean, I'm still surprised when my clients come to me and say, "I just rented my basement for $2,200." I'm
yeah,
like, people are paying $2,200 to live underground, right?
yeah.
So imagine if instead of moving and downsizing, you stayed where you are and you were able to create that secondary suite, which gives you, let's call it an extra 2 grand a month for the rest of your life, in addition to your pensions, right? I mean, that's not a bad outcome for those people.
Absolutely. I love that. And the other thing that we got to think about too is, we're seeing, and you mentioned this, we're seeing people stay in their homes longer, right? And the other part that I had, and to your comment as well, is we're seeing a lot more opportunity for um, multiple generations to live in one household. Well,
Yes, yes,
and that was already happening, right? So
it
now
was.
this, I can't think of a better way to say this, but I know there is. Now this legalizes that, in a sense that you can have a legal second, third, or even fourth unit within that same home, and which adds value to it. And I was going down the Twitter feed earlier this morning, and like, oh, here we go. But I was reading all about this, and one of the questions that was put out there, and it got me thinking. Maybe you and I can spend a moment or two on it. Is okay. Does does this change, or this new zoning that's coming into play, has this added value to all those homes, or does it kind of create an equal playing field? And I kind of went both ways on this.
Mm.
To the properties that are already fourplexes or have multiple units, well, yeah, there's already added value there. Uh, I think it comes down to the location and the size of the property still, and how much value is added. What do you think on that comment, Dion?
I think it always comes down to this term that we use in real estate, the best and highest use, right?
There you
And
go.
so that's going to continue to be important. So on a regular suburban street where there's maybe a couple of duplexes, a bungalow, a double story, a mixed bag, I think, in those types of neighborhoods, yes, this is probably going to have a really interesting positive impact. Now, if we jump to Forest Hill, is everybody in the streets of Forest Hill tomorrow going to decide to chop up their home into 4 units? Unlikely, right? And that's because the best and highest use of that property in that location is to appeal to the highest income person who's going to pay the 4, 5, $7 million for that home, right? Whereas nobody's going to pay $7 million for a fourplex in Forest Hill. So I think it's going to be location dependent based on best and highest use.
Yeah, that's a great comment, and of course there's other pieces that come into play here, and the additional build out that you have to do. And of course, you got to follow the Canadian or the Ontario building guidelines and everything else that falls along with that. You're not going to see a bunch of chopped up homes in a sense, because you still have to submit your plans and get your permits and things like that. And there's requirements within those permits. So I think, and we can kind of go down the road of, well, not my backyard, all the NIMBYs out there. Yet I think this kind of plays into both hands, not in my backyard, but also at the same time, those people crave more housing and affordable housing. And this is not going to, I don't think, Dion, this is not going to create affordable housing tomorrow. This is just
Yeah.
going to create more housing tomorrow.
Yeah, and look, how long does it take for a government decision to then trickle down to action in the market? And probably we should spend a minute talking about the mortgage side of things, because when this happens, banks will also need to figure out how to change potential guidelines around this, and figure out, okay, how can we now lend on this stuff, and does it impact value on the asset so that we can lend more to those people? So there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen. But let's say, the decision today, I can fairly sort of confidently say, in 5 years from now, we'll see the impact of these decisions in 5 years from now. And will it have created more units for people to live in? For sure, right? And if I jump over to the mortgage qualifying, question there. I will tell you that most banks, if you have a legal unit on your property, will recognize that unit's income for you to be able to qualify. And so, as it now, let's say homeowners today make these transformations, and there's a new young family a couple of years from now looking to buy a property, and they're struggling not just for qualifying, but also to figure out how they get their head around a mortgage payment on a single family home, which you and I know we're going through right now. If we have that basement rental or two extra units on the property, then a bank will allow us to use that income to qualify. And then when they're in the home, that family now might have a mortgage payment which on paper looks like $5,000 a month, but because of the impact of those rents, maybe it's only $2,000 a month. And you and I both know clients who have set themselves up that way. But it'd be great to have more product out there for first-time home buyers to enter the market that way.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think this is where the banks will just kind of sit. This is my opinion. The banks will sit back just for the moment, because the banks don't typically move fast, and just kind of observe and look for that gaps. And if they start getting a lot of applications for homes with multiple units, to me that tells, if I was in their position, well, here's an opportunity that we need to actually provide a different product for, a new product. And they wouldn't want to, again, this is all me just thinking out loud. They wouldn't want to turn their back on the largest populous area in Canada and say, we're not lending on half the homes or a quarter of the homes or a third of the homes there. That's just not going to happen. Do you think the same? Or
Oh, correct. Look, and I mean, bottom line is, as long as it's done legally, like the units meet fire, electrical, plumbing code, then I don't think the banks are going to have any issues with these things. And these units will only be created under those terms going forward. So it's just a matter of getting I guess, the public and the banks comfortable with the idea that we may more frequently see applications where we have the basement helper rent on the application, and it
right.
might become more of the norm than it is now.
Yeah, yeah. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, I already own a home in this area and I want to add a suite or two suites. And the easiest way that I know how to fund something like that, pay for something like that, is to use a secure line of credit. Would you agree? Other than cash on hand, would you agree with that? Is that perhaps the best way to set it up?
100%, and we do that for clients all day. So, put simply, you bought a house years ago for 500 grand. It's worth $1 million today. We take a little bit of that equity that's created, maybe 100K, to do the things you need to do to go and create that basement apartment, or third or fourth unit, depending on what you do. And these accessory dwelling units, ADUs as they call these garden suites. A lot of our clients are doing that right now as well. And not creating the basement, but actually a brand new structure on their property, right? And in most cases, they're funding it from the equity in their existing home.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we could talk on this for quite some time, but we do got to wrap this video up. Dion, how do people get a hold of you?
Yeah, just reach out to me. My website is mortgagesbydion.com.
That's pretty easy. I love it, my friend. So for Dion Begg and all the new ADUs out there and the fourplexes, that's it from us. And we'll see everybody on the next video. Bye for now.